Welcome into another special edition of the Fast Lane, and it is finally time, folks, to preview some college football games. We are previewing the Virginia Cavaliers taking on the Richmond Spiders. So a team from the 804, my hometown, my home area, coming up to Charlottesville. And joining me is Bob Black from both ESPN Richmond, but most importantly, he is the voice of the Richmond Spiders. Bob, so thankful to have you on. How are you doing, my friend?
Doing great, Trey. Great to catch up with you again. And like you, very amped, very pumped for it being game week for college football.
You've had plenty of interviews on your sports show on ESPN Richmond, as well as talking to coaches amongst the staff. So what's the excitement level in the city with the team as football is here?
Well, I do think it actually started with the end of last season. The Spiders didn't get where they wanted to go, which would have been the postseason. But at one point, Trey, they were 2-5 and seemingly dead in the water. And yet the battle cry was, we want to finish with a winning record, which meant a 4-game winning streak to end the season. And that's exactly what those guys did. It was very impressive. Nobody gave up. Nobody quit on the team. Nobody quit on the coaching staff. And they did win those last 4 games, including the last one against the rival Tribe of William and Mary to get to 6-5. And I think that has springboarded them through the spring and through the summer and to literally as we speak today. But of course, now none of that really means anything. Now you got to create the energy and the excitement and the victories in 2022. But I think they're poised to do that. And kind of the long-winded answer to your question, I think they're really, really excited about the offense this time around, which is something different for Richmond football, which has been a defensive-based, our signature is defense-first program, especially under 60-year head coach Russ Huesman. But I think with the changes they made on offense, they feel really good about the points they can put on the scoreboard.
Yeah, we're gonna dive all into that, but first, let's go back into a time machine. The last time a first-year head coach played a game against Richmond was 2016 under Bronco Mendenhall, and that was Richmond actually was able to pull off the upset in that game. Is the coaching staff drawing any inspiration from that? Are they pulling any ties? But it's like, that's so far in the past that we can't really look at it.
Well, my guess here is that both coaching staffs are reminding their teams of that game for different reasons. From the Spider perspective, it will be, hey, this program has done this before. It can be done. And from the Virginia perspective, they will remind them, hey, this has happened to us before. Do not take this team lightly. We need to prepare just as we would for an ACC opponent and make sure it doesn't happen again. So I think it's been probably addressed in both locker rooms, but obviously there are no players remaining from 2016 that impacted that game 6-7 years ago. But I do think it's probably a reminder in both locker rooms for differing reasons, from the positive side for Richmond and maybe the negative side from UVA.
And you could say that the same about the Tech ODU game that's also happening this week, or on Friday, I should say. But let's dive into this and the changes at Richmond. You mentioned the 6-5 record last season, the 4-game winning streak to end the year. UVA, of course, the opposite, finishing on a 4-game losing streak and that kind of awful loss to the Hokies in the Commonwealth Cup game. And then obviously bowl game getting canceled. The changes, new coach Tony Elliott comes in. But Richmond made some changes on their coaching staff as well, bringing in Billy Gosh from VMI and his high power offense, 31.3 points last season. So the air raid is coming to Richmond.
Yeah, he likes to try and call it the pro raid, meaning if the defense will give you the running game, he's going to take it. But he's obviously, to your reference, his calling card is offensive firepower, throwing the football. So Coach Kosh didn't come alone either. He came with a couple of standout players that he coached at VMI. Our quarterback will be Reese Udinsky, record-shattering quarterback for the Keydets. He went off to try and play at the FBS level at Maryland last season, but never really got much time with the Terrapins. Has a year of eligibility remaining, so he came with Coach Kosh to be the Spiders' starting quarterback. And then Jacob Harris is the FCS All-American wide receiver, record-shattering wide receiver for VMI, who completed his VMI eligibility last year. Of course, the Keydets VMI does not have a graduate program. So he was looking for a new home to take that opportunity for the 5th year. So he came with Reese Udinsky and Coach Kosh. So between the three of them, it has generated an awful lot of excitement for offensive football for the Spiders this year.
Yeah, how much talent can be on this offensive staff? Obviously, you look at, past quarterbacks, Kyle Ouellette is probably the most recent name you could bring up in terms of a talented quarterback, but this is offense has some expectations that really hasn't been around the program in quite some time.
Yeah, and I think what they have surrounded Reese with is a key to exactly what you're saying. In addition to Jacob Harris, last year's 2 leading receivers are back: Leroy Henley, who was a transfer from East Carolina, and Josiah Williams, who's a local product from Thomas Dale High School in Richmond. He hails from Petersburg. So they're both back. They added another transfer wide receiver in Nick DeGennaro, who began his collegiate career at Maryland. So he was there with Reese last year. He didn't get a whole lot of playing time, so he went to a school that actually recruited him out of high school, meaning Richmond. So that gives the Spiders 4 really good wide receivers. I would say, Trey, at the FCS level, the Spiders feel about as good as that foursome of wide receivers as Virginia feels about its 4 wide receivers at the FBS level. And then behind Udinsky in the backfield, they've got 3 running backs who have all had time. They have all had success. Aaron Dykes and Savon Smith will be the top 2. And then Mylan Howard, who has missed really the last 2 seasons with a knee injury, he's back and he looks as good as new. So I think they feel good about the stable of running backs and the at least quartet of wide receivers.
And obviously, this is facing a defense that gave up a whole lot of yards to everyone last season. The biggest question marks around Virginia, we'll get into the offensive line question, is this defense. So even if it's an FCS, FBS kind of opponent where you maybe not get the most out of it compared to the games later in the season, obviously the ones in the CAA against Elon, Villanova, and you mentioned William and Mary, to name a few, in a very open CAA with no JMU. What do you want to see, or what does the coaching staff want to see from this offense in game 1 that they can build off for the rest of the season, despite facing their talent-wise toughest opponent?
Yeah, I think it'll start in the trenches. I do think they feel okay about their matchups across the line of scrimmage. The Spiders' offensive line, academically, they are all seniors, from center to guard to tackle. They all have differing eligibility remaining, but they all have at least a couple of years of eligibility if they elect to take it. But it's a veteran offensive line. They've had to replace a couple of guys, certainly nothing like what UVA is going through, where they had to replace the entire offensive line. And I think they feel pretty good about the matchups across that line of scrimmage on the defensive line for UVA. Obviously, the Cavaliers have a standout linebacker in Nick Jackson, great defensive back in Anthony Johnson, and several other returning guys on defense. But I do think the Spiders feel as though they can match up at least on the line of scrimmage and move the ball and put some points on the board.
Well, it is now gone full circle for Brennan Armstrong, whose first game, or first career passes, I should say, were against Richmond in the last time these two teams met. This guy is one of the most talented quarterbacks in the country, one of the best in the ACC. How tough is it going to be for this Richmond defense to just contain him with the ample weapons that he has, which is up there in the ACC with some of the best?
Yeah, isn't it funny how, he was a blip on the radar. Nobody even remembered what he did in that game, 2018. I think he was 1 for 2.
Yeah, it was like 4 passes. That's what I think.
Yeah, so something like that. Bryce Perkins had his coming out party in that game against Richmond, his debut against the Spiders in 2018. So Virginia has beaten Richmond since that Bronco Mendenhall debut in 2016.
Good comparison.
Yeah, so there is that. The Cavaliers did convincingly win the last game between these teams in 2018. But Armstrong and the wide receivers are obviously going to be a handful for the Spiders. And ironically enough, for all the question marks about UVA's offensive line, the Spiders have those on their defensive line this year. The defensive line had been the strength of this team the past couple of years, but a lot of those guys are gone. Kobe Turner, who was an all-conference defensive tackle, transferred for his graduate year to former Richmond coach Dave Clawson's Wake Forest Demon Deacons. They lost several guys to graduation, defensive ends, Caleb Brooks, Darius Reynolds, linebacker Tyler Dressler was one of the leading tacklers. They all ran out of eligibility. and have departed. And in addition to that, really the top returning defensive lineman, Aiden Murray, went down in the summertime with a torn Achilles tendon, and he won't play this year. He'll come back and play next year, but he won't play this season. So the defensive line is a huge question mark for Richmond. I think they're really solid at linebacker, and the secondary is much improved and fairly deep. But the battle of the line of scrimmage when UVA has the ball is going to be significant for the Spiders.
The good news, I guess, if you're a Richmond Spiders fan, or maybe a little bit of concern if you're a UVA fan, is you're starting a freshman at left tackle. You're replacing, as you mentioned already, everyone on the offensive line. We'll put on your radio host hat here instead of your play-by-play hat. How, if you're on the other side, if you're a Who's fan, what do you want to see from that offensive line in this game where you really can settle yourself in against an, like you mentioned, an unproven defensive line?
Well, I guess that's twofold, because everything we're hearing coming out of Tony Elliott's camp is that they don't want to rely on Brennan Armstrong as they have in the past to throw the ball 40 or 50 times and also run with the football they just don't dozen times. They don't want to do that. So I know they're hopeful that their running backs, whether it's Jones or Hollins or the freshman Brown, whoever they might put in there, are able to run the ball. So that would be number one for the offensive line, right? Is to knock some of those Spider defensive linemen, off the ball and open some holes and allow their running backs to gain some significant yardage. Secondly, just keep Brennan Armstrong upright, because as long as he's on 2 feet, he's probably going to beat you throwing the ball somewhere to one of those at least 4 wide receivers. So I think for UVA, that offensive line has 2 tasks at hand. Open some holes, let the running backs establish a ground game, but by all means, don't let anybody get to the quarterback.
The good news for UVA, you start freshman at left tackle, you have a left-handed quarterback, so he's not the blind side blocker. Right. That is a positive sign if you're the Who's. Talking more about this offense and Tony Elliott kind of changing, UVA ran offense similar to what Richmond's going to run, kind of very pass happy, didn't want to run the ball as much. What are your expectations for Tony Elliott, who's had a lot of success in his career at Clemson, granted, with premier talent that UVA is just not going to be able to get, especially right now? What are your expectations, and what do you want to see from him against a Richmond? Is it just get the job done, get the win, and see where the growth can come?
Yeah, I think as far as the opener, he is going to want to try and establish the running game. I do think he has made a point of that in the summertime and the preseason camp and this week leading up to the first game. But I also think, Trey, when push comes to shove, he's a pretty smart guy. And I think he's going to see what he's got with Armstrong at quarterback. And you don't want to waste that talent. You don't want to waste that left arm. And you don't want to waste those 4 wide receivers. I think they're really excited about seeing what Davis can do coming back from the injury. They already know what, Wicks can do and what Kemp can do and what Thompson can do. I just think eventually he's going to say, let's get the ball into the hands of our playmakers. And that's going to mean Brennan Armstrong finding those wide receivers. That's a temptation that I think is too good. Maybe once they get past the Richmond game, I know they got Illinois on the horizon. I got to believe they're going to play to Brennan Armstrong's strength at some point.
Yeah, it's like he's coached like a Trevor Lawrence, a Deshaun Watson, these NFL quarterbacks before, and he knows what he's doing. That is a great point by you, Bob. And going into the game, the Vegas line is 24.5, over under 56.5. I won't press you since you're calling the game to give a pick, but what are some expectations you could give them for both sides that you want to see in this game, and what do you expect kind of the teams will have in terms of what they can take away from it?
Well, I do think competitiveness is number one for Richmond. I think ball security will be important. I think how this new offense operates will be really important. I think Udinski and Harris have done a really good job of helping the new offensive coordinator, Billy Kosh, install this offense. I think the guys have really liked that they're not just hearing it from one voice, a coach's voice, because obviously Reese and Jake know this offense as well as Billy Kosh does. So I do think that has really helped. They love up tempo. We'll see how quick this offense can go. And we'll see if they can keep their hands on the football. They cannot turn the ball over. I know I sound like a coach in saying that, but I really do think that that's true in this case. And then I think Richmond They need to play to the speed of the game. And this happens every time an FCS opponent plays an FBS. The first couple of drives, you just can't simulate the speed of the game in practice when you get set to play an FBS opponent. It happened to Richmond last year against Virginia Tech. Once they got past that first drive, they were really competitive the entire game against the Hokies. So I think you're going to see that again Saturday. At the outset, Virginia's offense is going to be quick, and the Spiders are going to have to figure it out quickly.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining me for this preview. How can our listeners connect with you? Maybe they want to learn more about this Richmond squad before game day.
Well, obviously, I'm on Twitter at Spider Voice. That's probably the best way to do it. And then our afternoon show, if you don't mind the shameless plug, on 106.1 ESPN in Richmond and ESPNRichmond.com. And we're previewing the Spiders and the Cavaliers, but also, as you alluded to earlier, Old Dominion, Virginia Tech, and William & Mary's playing Charlotte, and VMI's opening with Wake Forest. It's a great week for college football previews.
As a former intern of ESPN Richmond, I highly Bob's one of the best in the game. Bob, thank you so much for joining me for this, and thank you so much, everyone, for listening. This preview of Richmond versus UVA, as always, you can listen to our previews at the Fast Lane with Ed Lane podcast. You can connect with me at Trey Lyle VT on Twitter. Thank you so much for listening to this special edition of the Fast Lane.